Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning back in once again to Authentic Black Goddess TV. So as you're coming in, please feel free to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and click the word all so that you're notified each time that I go live. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at QueenAhmadiyyah, also on Twitter at DGoddess27, and on Instagram at divine_goddess_27. Okay, hello, Misfits. Andrea Hart, Regina, Cutie Tootie, Amari Raheem, Silent D is Black, Katia, Brandon Christines, Gila Evans. So thank you all. Hi, beautiful queen. Let's get it. I am so ready. Okay. All right. Uh-oh, people. I forgot to turn my alarm off. Hold on for a second. I hope this thing doesn't go off. I hope it doesn't go off again. Anyway, so that all being said, hold on for a second. I'm just going to turn this off real quick. I got to turn this off. Yep. Okay. Sorry about that, people. I don't want my alarm going off in the middle of the broadcast. Okay, so now it's good. Okay, so anyway. So tonight, I told you guys last week that I'm going to be talking about DeMeo Crew. That's their name, DeMeo Crew, okay? And now they were one of the Gambino crime family, one of their crews. And in fact, the person that I talked about last week, Richard Kuklinski, who we call the Iceman, who was a notorious killer who killed likely 200 people by himself. Well, he was part of this crew at one point. He worked with them. So we're going to be talking about them tonight. Yes, 50 Jack, DeMeo. I am ready for the hot topics tonight, Queen. Okay. So listen, let me just tell you guys this before I get started. So last night, hold on, let me fix this lamp. Okay. So last night, after I did that spooky video on the paranormal channel, Beyond the Realm, I kid you not, I started hearing strange noises. My computer started acting all crazy. I got locked out of the computer. I put in the pin several times. It kept saying the wrong pin. I tried to reset it. It wouldn't work. I worked on it all last night. It would not let me in the computer. Now, do you all think that's just coincidence or something spooky was going on? I'm just saying. Queen is so pretty cute. Thank you, Alvin. I'm telling y'all, I was spooked. I literally had to sleep with one eye open, people. Basil's putting up the ghost. I'm serious. Listen, I'm telling you, I was hearing strange noises. Nobody was here but me. And then when my computer started acting crazy, that was the worst. And do you know what I had to end up doing? Because it wouldn't let me get back in the computer. This happened literally as soon as I logged off. As soon as I logged off. Yes, Judah Queen, seriously. I promise you, as soon as I logged off from the live, I went on to edit the video, and then the computer locked me out. I couldn't put anything on there. I couldn't put my pen or nothing. So I tried all last night. I couldn't get it. I finally just went to sleep. Today, I literally had to reset my entire computer. So all my files that were on there were lost. All of my files were lost. Every last thing I had saved on there was all gone because I had to reset it like it was a brand new computer and start from scratch. Okay? Please tell me somebody make that make sense. Crazy, right? The screw tube spirit. Alice said crime stories are haunting you. Alice, it was that paranormal story I told last night. I had no business telling it clearly. But that's not going to stop me because there's more to come. Okay, so let's get started with this story, people. Roy DeMeo was the leader of DeMeo Crew, right? So let's talk about it. Okay. Roy DeMeo was an Italian-American mobster in the Gambino crime family. Now, he headed the infamous DeMeo Crew, which operated out of his bar called the Gemini Lounge. And it is believed that he had committed hundreds of murders. Core members of the crew included Chris Rosenberg, Henry Borelli, Anthony Center, Joseph Testa, and Frederick Denome. Now, DeMeo Crew were especially notorious for what became known as the Gemini Method. Now, this is where the victims were typically lured into the apartment behind the Gemini Lounge. Then they were shot, dismembered, and their body parts were wrapped up and sent to garbage dumps in Brooklyn. Most of their remains were never recovered. Now, as law enforcement began to close in on the gang, DeMeo himself was murdered, probably by one of the members of his own crew, under the orders of Paul Costello. Now, let me just tell you something about these people they were killing. First and foremost, they were killing Black and Puerto Ricans. Well, they were killing them in the beginning because they wanted to use them to practice, because they wanted to carefully know how to carve up a body and get rid of the remains. So they would practice this on Blacks and Puerto Ricans. So with that being said, at his lounge, the Gemini Lounge, when it was closing and everybody's leaving for the night, they would lure a Black or a Puerto Rican person, get them to stay, offer them a drink or whatever, and then lure them back there and shoot them and kill them and then dismember them. Okay? This is what they would do. Now, Roy Albert DeMeo was born in 1942 in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, into a working class Italian immigrant family. As a teen, he began a small loan sharking operation, which turned into a full-time job by the age of 17. Now, DeMeo graduated from James Madison High School in 1959, and then he began working in a criminal enterprise while maintaining legitimate business practices, and he shortly thereafter married his high school sweetheart, and they had 3 children. He worked his way up in the criminal career ladder and continued a loan sharking operation. Now, Gambino soldier Anthony Gaggi took notice of DeMeo and told him that he could make even more money with his successful business if he in fact came to work directly for the Gambino crime family. Now, through the late 1960s, DeMeo organized crime prospects, and they increased on 2 fronts. He continued in the loan sharking business with Gaggi and began developing a crew of young men involved in car theft and drug trafficking. Now, it was this collective of criminals that would become known both in the underworld and in law enforcement circles as DeMeo Crew. Now, the first member of the crew was Chris Rosenberg, who met DeMeo in 1966 at the age of 16. Rosenberg was dealing drugs at a Cornercy gas station, and Roy helped him increase his business and profits by loaning Chris money so that he could deal the narcotics in larger amounts. Now, by 1972, Chris had introduced his friends to Roy and began working for him as well. Now, the members of the crew included Joseph Guglielmo, and that was Roy's cousin, Joseph Testa, Anthony Center, and Joseph's younger brother, Patrick Testa. Now, Roy joined the borough of Brooklyn's credit union that same year, and he began gaining a position on the board of directors shortly afterwards. He utilized his position to launder money that he had earned through his illegal ventures. He also introduced his colleagues at the credit union to a lucrative side business, laundering the money of drug dealers he had become acquainted with. Now, Roy also built up his loan sharking business with funds that were stolen from credit union reserves. His collection of loan shark customers, while still primarily those in the car industry, soon included other businesses such as a dentist office, an abortion clinic, restaurants, and even flea markets. Now, he was also listed as an employee of a Brooklyn company by the name of S&C Sportswear Corporation, and frequently told his neighbors that he worked in construction, also food and retailing, and used car business. In late 1974, a conflict that had erupted between the DeMeo Crew and a young body shop owner named Andre Katz had continued to escalate. In May of 1975, Roy was informed by a police officer that as a result of this conflict, Andre was cooperating with the authorities. Now, in June, he was lured to a place where he could be confronted. And after being abducted, he was stabbed to death and then dismembered. An accomplice who helped bait Katz confessed her role, And then Joseph Testa and Henry Borelli were both arrested. They would secure an acquittal at trial in January of 1976. Now, this was the first known murder committed by DeMeo Crew. And for years, it was thought to have been the first occasion where Roy or members of his crew had actually dismembered a body for disposal. Now, in 2003, however, new information was provided to the FBI by Bonanno underboss Salvatore Vitale, who claimed that in 1974, he was ordered to deliver the corpse of a man who had just been murdered, and he was ordered to take the body to a garage in Queens so that it could be disposed of. When he arrived at the location, Vitale claims that Roy DeMeo was present, along with several other men who may have been early members of DeMeo Crew. Vitale also claims that Roy had a knife with him, presumably to dismember the corpse. Now, this information suggests that DeMeo and his followers may have been involved in murder and dismemberment earlier than previously thought by law enforcement. And here's another thing to notice. Now, Roy DeMeo, he was a butcher prior to doing all of this. At one point, he was a butcher's apprentice. So he clearly knew how to dismember and cut up things. And he had the people, and he had the tools to do so. Now, as the 1970s continued, Roy cultivated his followers into a crew experienced with the process of murdering and dismembering the victims, with the exception of killings intended to send a message to anyone who would hinder their criminal activities, or murders that presented no other alternative. A set of method of execution was established by Roy and his crew to ensure that victims would be dispatched quickly and then made to disappear. Now, the method of execution was dubbed the Gemini Method, named after the Gemini Lounge, which Roy owned, the primary hangout of the DeMeo Crew as well, and the site where most of the crew's victims were killed. Now, the exact process of the Gemini Method, revealed by multiple crew members and associates who became government witnesses in the early 1980s, it went as follows. This is how they carried out their method. Typically, the victim would be lured through the side door of the lounge, and in the apartment that made up the back portion of the building, this is where they would lure them to. Now, at that point, a crew member, and it was usually Roy DeMeo, according to a crew member who turned government informant named Frederick DeMone. He says Roy would then approach with a silenced pistol in one hand and a towel in the other, shooting the victim in the head and then wrapping the towel around the victim's head, wound it up like a turban in order to staunch the blood flow. Now, immediately after, another member of the crew, originally it was Chris Rosenberg up until 1979, when he was murdered. But according to a government witness testimony. Now, so another person would then stab the victim in the heart. Now, they would stab them in the heart in order to prevent the blood from continuing to pump because after the gunshot. But by then, the victim would be dead, at which point the body would be stripped of its clothing and dragged into the bathroom, where it was left while the remaining blood drained out and the rest of it coagulated within the body. Congealed within the body. This was to eliminate the messiness of the next step. Now, when crew members would place the body onto plastic tarps laid out in the main room, then they would proceed to dismember it, cutting off the arms, the legs, and the heads. The body parts would then be put into bags, placed in cardboard boxes, and sent off to the Fountain Avenue dump in Brooklyn. There were so many tons of garbage that were dropped there each day that it was nearly impossible for the bodies to ever be discovered. Now, during the initial stages of the early 1980s, federal state task force targeting of the DeMeo Crew, a plan by authorities to excavate sections of the dump in order to locate remains of the victims was aborted when it was deemed too costly and likely to fail at locating any meaningful evidence. Now, some of the victims would be killed in other ways for various reasons. At times, suspected informants are those who committed an act of disrespect against a member of the crew or one of their superiors would have their body left in the streets. Okay, they'd be left in the streets of New York to serve as a message and a warning to anyone else who dared to disrespect them. As well, there were occasions when it was not possible to lure the intended victim to the Gemini Lounge, in which case other locations would have to be used. Now, a yacht owned by one of DeMeo's men was used on at least one occasion to dispose of bodies as well. Dominic Montiglio, who visited DeMeo frequently to pick up payments for Ahmadiyyah, said in an interview that if the crew didn't kill at least 3 people per week, they would be depressed. Can you imagine? They said they would be depressed, people. Please pay attention to the nefariousness of it all. Now, in the latter half of 1975, Roy became a silent partner in a peep show prostitution establishment in New Jersey after the owner of a business became unable to pay his loan sharking debts. Roy also began dealing in pornography, including bestiality. So sick, right? Which he sold to his New Jersey establishment, as well as connections he had in Rhode Island. Now, when his superior, Nino Gaggi, found out about Roy's involvement in such taboo films, he ordered Roy to stop under the threat of death. Roy did not stop, however, and Gaggi continued to accept his payments every week. Now, Gaggi's nephew, Dominic Montiglio, claimed to be the suspect, or claimed that the subject was simply never mentioned between the two men after the initial confrontation. And as long as Roy continued to provide copiously for his boss, the violation of his order was never addressed. Now, another forbidden subject between Roy and his boss, Nino, were narcotics. In the Gambino crime family, as most of the other mafia families in the country, drug dealing was an act punishable by death for any members caught being involved. Anyone owning to the stiffer sentences imposed for such crimes. Now, it was feared by the administration of the mafia families that those facing such harsh penalties would be more likely to flip. So that's why they didn't sell drugs. It wasn't because they didn't want to sell it to their own people or whatever. No, they didn't want to be them selling drugs because they knew they had stiffer penalties. And if you're facing a lot of time, then you might be more likely to snitch on everybody else. So that's why they didn't play that. So it was feared by the administrators of the mafia families that those facing such harsh penalties would be more likely to flip or become cooperators for the government. Gaggi and DeMeo, like many others, however, continued to deal in narcotics despite the warnings due to the massive amounts of profits earned. Now, by this time, Roy's drug operations had expanded greatly from his initial operations in the late 1960s and early 1970s. He had recently started selling cocaine out of the Gemini Lounge. And he was also the financier of a large marijuana operation that imported the drug from Colombia in 25-pound bales. The marijuana would be delivered from offshore freighters and sold out of a Canarsie body shop. Roy's weekly tributes to Nino continued to increase from his drug operations, and Nino continued to feign ignorance as of the source of the money. Because he knew he was selling drugs, but he wasn't going to say anything because he was getting paid real nice. Now, as 1975 drew to a close, Roy was almost indicted due to the IRS investigations into his income. Months earlier, the Bureau of Brooklyn Credit Union had been pushed into insolvency as the result of DeMeo and his colleagues plundering it for its finances. Now, insolvency, that's basically when you owe so much in taxes, but you don't even have the assets or the money or funds to cover what you owe. The debt is, in fact, more than what you own, okay? So they have been pushed into insolvency due to DeMeo and his colleagues plundering its finances. Now, as a result, Roy quit the credit union, avoiding law enforcement attention that increased as the union was merged into one another. Now, despite this, Roy had already gained the attention of the IRS earlier that year. You can tell those Mayos love blood. It's why they eat half cooked meat. So Roy had already gained the attention of the IRS earlier in that week before an indictment could be handed down against him, however. He utilized false affidavits from businesses owned by friends and acquaintances, claiming that he was on their payrolls as an employee. Now, these affidavits served to account for some of his income, and he and the IRS reached a settlement. So he was pretty slick. All he did was lie and act like he was working for different people when clearly he wasn't working for anybody but himself. Now, in May of 1976, another murder was committed by the DeMeo Crew. Joseph Broschini, a made member in another of the New York's 5 families, was involved in an argument with Roy related to pornography or to his pornography business, in which both were involved. The argument turned into a physical altercation when Broschini punched DeMeo in the face. Mayo on Mayo crime, people pay attention. He gave him a black eye. Now, Mafia protocol prevented DeMeo, as an associate of the Gambino family, from retaliating in any way against Broschini, or he would be killed. Now, DeMeo went to his boss, Nino, and explained the situation. Dominic Montiglio, Nino's nephew, who was now fully working for his uncle, claimed to have been present at this meeting, where DeMeo allegedly swore revenge regardless of the rules. Nino responded that they would never be given permission, or that he would never be given permission, but reportedly agreed with Roy's intentions, merely advising him to ensure that the murder could not be tracked back to them. Now, on May the 20th of 1976, Roy and Henry Borelli shot Broschini 5 times in the back of the head in the office of a used car dealership that he owned. The office was then ransacked, and the other employees were blindfolded and handcuffed prior to the shooting in order to give the illusion that the murder was the result of an armed robbery that had gone wrong. Now, in the following month, Vincent Governor, a young man with no organized crime ties, was shot down by Roy and Anthony Gaggi. Gaggi had held a long-standing feud with Governor and had told his nephew, Dominic Montiglio, that he kept a lookout for him. One night, Dominic spotted Governor's car outside of the building, hosting a craps game in the New York neighborhood of Bensonhurst. Now, once informed of his nephew's discovery, Nino, along with Roy and Dominic, excused themselves from a birthday party being held at the time for Dominic's wife, and they drove to the location where Governor's car had been seen. The trio waited until Governor left the game and approached his car, at which point Nino and Roy shot him several times. Governor died in the hospital a week later. Now, 1 month later in July, Roy flew to Florida and murdered George Byram, another man targeted for revenge by Nino Gaggi. Now, Byram had provided information to robbers that led to Nino's Florida home being robbed. Roy lured Byram to a hotel under the pretenses of a business deal. As soon as Byram walked into the room, he was shot to death by DeMeo. Now, Roy, Nino, and Anthony Plates and a Gambino soldier operating out of Florida originally planned to dismember the corpse in the hotel room and then transport it out in suitcases. The plan was quickly abandoned due to the presence of construction workers near the hotel room, and the body was found shortly thereafter, lying in the hotel's bathtub with its head halfway sawed off. Can you imagine? Melanin said murder is the case they gave them. Oh, nefarious male thugs. Absolutely. Roy's sources of income, as well as his crew, continued to grow. Now, by July of 1976, he added an automobile firm by the name of Team Auto Wholesalers to his loan shark customers. Now, the owner of Team Auto, Matthew Rega, also purchased stolen vehicles from the crew and sold them off at a New Jersey car lot that he owned. He also involved himself with hijacking, targeting trucks that were delivering or receiving shipments from the JFK International Airport. His crew now included Edward Grillo, a hijacker who had just been released from prison. Roy allegedly added to his body count, according to various sources, including an FBI informant who reported that Roy DeMeo was a ruthless killer who had killed at least a dozen people and dismembered their bodies to make them disappear. Nino Gaggi's nephew, Dominic Montiglio, who sometimes drove Roy on errands, also claims that during one trip around, this time Roy had pointed to a recently built gas station and stated that he and his crew had buried the bodies of 2 victims under the foundation. Now, in the fall of 1976, the Gambino crime family went through a massive change when it lost its boss, Carlo Gambino. He died of natural causes. It's good to fight for an honor as a Black man. Yes, absolutely, Daniel. Thank you for your insight and for your contribution. Peace, love, and blessings to you. Now, in 1976, the fall of 1976, the Gambino crime family went through a massive change when its boss, Carlo Gambino, died of natural causes. Now, Paul Castellano was then named the boss. And with Anilo Della Croce retaining the position of the underboss. Now, the implications of this were twofold for Roy. His superior, Nino, was elevated to the position of capo, taking over the crew of men that Castellano headed. This promotion was beneficial for Roy because his mentor was now even closer to the ruling Gambino hierarchy. Another advantage was that now that Carlo Gambino had died, new associates would be eligible for membership into the family. Now, Castellano did not immediately open the books for new members, however, opting instead to promote existing members and change around leadership of the crews that now presided over one another. He reportedly told Gaggi he was against the idea of DeMeo ever being a made member for a number of reasons. Now, Castellano's illegal activities focused more on white-collar crime, and it was said by both law enforcement and other mafioso that he looked at himself as more of a businessman than a gangster. He looked down on the street guys such as Roy, who were involved in things like auto theft and hijacking. Additionally, Castellano felt DeMeo was unpredictable and did not feel that he could be controlled. Nino's attempts at persuading Castellano to consider inducting Roy were continually rejected. Now, despite the considerable contributions Roy had already made to the Gambino's family, not least of which were his tens of thousands of dollars worth of weekly payments to Nino Gaggi, by the spring of 1977, DeMeo was still not a made member. Reportedly distraught at the situation, Roy continued to look for more opportunities to bring in larger amounts of profit to his superiors. Now, DeMeo found what he needed was to ensure that he would be officially inducted into the Gambino family when he formed an alliance with a gang of Irish American criminals known as the Westies, soon to be headed by James Coonan. Coonan's only DeMeo and Coonan. Can you all believe it? This is real. DeMeo Crew and Coonan's. I'm through. So Coonan's only obstacle at assuming control of the West Side and its lucrative money-making enterprise was Mickey Spillane, the mainstay of criminal activities in the area for over 20 years. Now, in May of 1977, Roy and Edward Grillo murdered Spillane at the behest of Coonan, who then became the top criminal figure in the West Side. Roy, sensing an opportunity to create a vast source of income for his superiors, informed Anthony Gaggi of the possibilities of a partnership between the Westies and the Gambino crime family. Now, shortly afterwards, Coonan and his second in command, Mickey Featherstone, were called to a meeting of Paul Castellano, becoming a de facto arm of the Gambino crime family and then agreeing to share 10% of all the profits. In exchange, the Westies would be privy to several lucrative union deals and take on murder contracts for the Italians. That is weird, right? Blackfoot's laughing. Now, it was his pivotal role in the Westie Gambino alliance that reportedly convinced Castellano to give Roy his button or formally induct him into the crime family. DeMeo was made in mid-1977, being put in charge of handling all family business with the Westies. He was also ordered to get permission before committing any murders and to avoid drug dealing. Now, despite this warning, DeMeo's crew continued to sell large amounts of cocaine, marijuana, and a variety of narcotic pills, which were all violations of many members of all 5 crews and families that continued to commit they continued to commit this through the late 1970s and early 1980s due to all of the tremendous profits they gained. Now, although he had been ordered by his superiors that he had to get permission before any murders, DeMeo continued to commit unsanctioned killings. In July of 1977, Roy and his men committed a double homicide, shooting to death Jonathan Quinn, a successful car thief suspected of cooperating with law enforcement, and Cherry Golden, Quinn's 19-year-old girlfriend. Now, DeMeo and his men dumped the bodies in locations where they would be discovered to serve as a warning against cooperation with authorities. When questioned by his superiors as to the motive of the killing of a young woman, Roy claimed she was a risk and may have cooperated with the police if they pressured her. Now, by 1978, Roy was heard bragging to his associates that he had murdered 100 people. It was also during this year that he put out the word, not just to the Gambino family, but the other New York Costa Nostra families as well, that he and his crew were available for murder contracts. In at least one case, the crew charged a relatively paltry fee of $5,000. Other murders were committed for free, Roy describing them to crew members as professional favors. Now, he added to his crew Frederick DeMone, who served as his chauffeur, but also became involved in the crew's various illegal activities. DeMone was reportedly fiercely loyal to Roy, who had also befriended him when the two were teenagers. Now, DeMone credited DeMeo for saving his life after a car crash at a drag race in which the burning car exploded just as he was saved by DeMeo from the wreckage. DeMeo used a knife to cut the seatbelt. Now, in November of 1978, DeMeo and his crew murdered one of their own members, and that was Edward Grillo. Grillo, who had fallen into heavy debt with DeMeo, was killed after Roy and Nino Gaggi felt that he was becoming more susceptible to police coercion to cooperate against the crew. Now, Grillo, who was dismembered and disposed of like many of the other crew members of murder victims, was the first occurrence of intra-crew discipline. The next member who was murdered by Roy and his crew was Chris Rosenberg, Roy's second in command within the group, and reportedly his most loyal ally. Rosenberg had set up a drug deal with a Cuban man living in Florida and then murdered him and his associate when they traveled to New York to complete the sale. Now, the Cuban had connections with a Colombian drug cartel, and violence was threatened between the Colombians and the Gambino families unless Rosenberg was murdered. Roy was ordered to kill Rosenberg, but stalled for weeks. During this period of time, Roy committed his most public murder on April 19th of 1979. Now, the victim being a college student with no criminal ties named Dominic Ragucci. He was paying for his tuition by going door to door as a salesman. Now, DeMeo saw Ragucci parked outside of his house and assumed that he was an assassin. See, he was so paranoid because of all the dirt that he had done and all the people he killed. He saw this innocent kid who was just a college student struggling to pay for his college debt. So he's going door to door, selling vacuums, right? Just a door-to-door salesman. And so he sees him sitting outside and automatically thinks he's an assassin. So he kills him. Okay, so after a car chase, which consisted of Freddie DeNome at the wheel with Roy DeMeo and Joseph Guglielmo hanging out of the windows, firing wildly. Guglielmo even shot holes in the car's floorboards in his excitement. Now, Ragucci was shot to death by Roy when his car became too damaged to continue driving. Now, can you imagine this? You're a college student. You're going around door to door trying to make money. All of a sudden, people you don't even know are chasing you down the street, shooting at you like it's the Wild West. And you're riding as fast as you can, but they're flying behind you. One of them's driving at full speed, and the other two are firing at you out of the window. You don't even know what is going on or why they're trying to kill you. So crazy. So anyway, Ragucci was shot to death by Roy when his car became too damaged to continue driving. Roy, convinced it was an assassin from the drug cartel, returned home and gathered his family. He drove them out of New York and left them at a hotel for a short time. Now, DeMeo's son, Albert, wrote in his book, which is titled For the Sins of My Father. He wrote that Roy started crying when he discovered he had killed an innocent boy. In the meantime, the murder of the college student had infuriated his superiors, and especially Nino Gaggi, who ordered him again to kill Chris Rosenberg before there were any other innocent victims. Now, in May of 1979, Rosenberg, who reportedly had no knowledge of the Colombian situation, arrived at a meeting of DeMeo's crew and was shot in the head by Roy. Now, so he killed Rosenberg because they felt like Rosenberg set up this drug deal and then killed the Colombians. But they say Rosenberg reportedly had no knowledge of this. So they're just killing the wrong people many of the time. How stupid. So anyway, crew member Anthony Center, thank you, Marjorie, for your contribution. Peace, love, and blessings to you. So now the crew member Anthony Center then finished Rosenberg off when he managed to get up after Roy shot him. Honey, I would have just laid there and played dead. Get up for what? You already shot. I would have laid there until I didn't hear anything else in the room. Now, unlike Grillo, Rosenberg's body was not dismembered or made to disappear. The Colombians had demanded that his murder make the papers. Otherwise, they would not believe it had actually occurred. Roy's men placed Rosenberg's body in his car and left it on the side of the Cross Bay Boulevard near Gateway National Wildlife Refuge so that it could be found. Now, Albert DeMeo wrote in his book that Rosenberg's murder affected his father deeply, and that when Roy came home after the murder, he went into the study room, and didn't come out for 2 whole days. Likewise, testimony from Frederick Denome and Vito Arena claims that Roy expressed regret at having to kill Chris and at times appeared depressed over it, because that was his friend that he knew since he was 16. Can you imagine? Now, as 1979 continued, Roy DeMeo began to expand his business activities, in particular his auto theft operation, which would soon become the largest in New York City's history. Now, dubbed the Empire Boulevard operation by FBI agents, the operation consisted of hundreds of stolen cars that were shipped from ports in New Jersey to Kuwait and Puerto Rico. Roy put together a group of 5 active partners in the operation, all of whom earned approximately $30,000 a week in profit. Now, aside from the active partners, other associates, good evening, beautiful goddess. I'm a little late, but I'm black. Thank you, David. Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for tuning black in. Peace, love, and blessings to you. Now, in 1979, as from the active partners, other associates and crew members performed the actual stealing of the automobiles off the streets of New York. Among these associates was Vito Arena, a longtime car thief and armed robber who began working for Roy in 1978 after murdering his old partner. Now, like Denome, Arena could become closely involved with the DeMeo Crew by the end of the 1970s, or he did become closely involved with them. In 1979, the scheme was nearly stopped by a legitimate car dealer who threatened to inform the police. He was murdered along with an uninvolved acquaintance before he could provide the proper authorities information. Please tell me, why did this fool tell them that he was going to snitch? You don't tell anybody you're going to snitch on them, and especially if they're mobsters. Who does that? Now, in late 1979, Roy and Nino Gaggi became involved in a conflict with Gapo, James Eppilato, and James Eppilato Jr., 2 made Gambino members in Gaggi's crew. Now, they were both respectively the paternal uncle and cousin of the corrupt former New York Police Department detective Louis Eppolito. Louis Eppolito's father, Ralph Eppolito, was James Eppolito's brother, and he was a made member of the Gambino crime family. Now, Eppolito met with Paul Costello and accused DeMeo and Gaggi of drug dealing, which carried the penalty of death. Now, Costello, to whom Gaggi was a close ally, sided with Ippolito in the situation and gave Gaggi permission to do what he pleased. He and Roy DeMeo shot the two to death in Ippolito Jr.'s 1978 Ford and the Ford Thunderbird en route to the Gemini Lounge on October the 1st of 1978. Clearly, he wanted to die. Absolutely. Now, a witness driving by heard the shots that were fired within the parked car, and managed to alert a nearby police officer, who arrested Gaggi after a shootout between the two that left Gaggi with a bullet wound to his neck. Now, because Roy had split up with Gaggi as they left the scene, he was not arrested or identified by the witness. Gaggi would be charged with murder and the attempted murder of a police officer. But through jury tampering, because you know they would pay off jurors back then, they still do these days, right? Through jury tampering, was convicted only of assault and given 5 to 15 years as a sentence in federal prison. Now, DeMeo would murder the witness shortly thereafter Gaggi's sentence in March of 1980. The Empire Boulevard operation had continued to expand through 1979 and 1980 until the warehouse serving as its headquarters was raided by agents from the Newark branch of the FBI in the summer of 1980. Now, the FBI had been surveilling the warehouse and some of the men unloading vehicles there, and they had shortly thereafter obtained a search warrant. Henry Borelli and Frederick Denome were arrested in May of 1981 for their roles in the operation, but there was not enough evidence to arrest any of the other active partners. Roy ordered Borelli and Denome to plead guilty to the charges in the hopes that it would stop any further investigations into his activities by the FBI or other law enforcement agencies. Now, name date reason Paul Rosenberg, July the 29th, 1973, was shot twice in the head in an alley in Flower Hill, New York, by Nino Gaggi and DeMeo after suspected of cooperating with authorities. Now, even if they just thought you talked to the authorities and gave them information, even if they didn't know for real, they didn't even have to have any proof or receipts, they would just kill you for even thinking that you could have. Now, Andre Katz, on June 13th of 1975, kidnapped, and this is a list. Hold on. This is a list of some of the people they killed, okay? Now, I'm not going to read all of it because we could go on for days, but I'm just going to read to you some of the names of the people they killed. Now, they killed, hold on, Paul Rothenberg, July 29th of 1973. He was shot twice in the head in an alley in Flower Hill, New York, by Nino Gaggi and DeMeo after he was suspected of cooperating with authorities. Then there was Andre Katz, killed on June 13th of 1975, kidnapped in Manhattan, taken to a Pantry Pride supermarket in Rockaway in Queens, where he was stabbed to death and dismembered by DeMeo, and also Henry Borelli, Anthony Center, and Joseph Testa, after Katz had testified before a grand jury in May of 1975. Now, Vito Borelli, mid-1975, Gambino's boss, Paul Castellano, ordered his death after Borelli made a statement on Castellano's appearance and made the comparison to Frank Perdue in front of his daughter, just because he insulted him, said something about his appearance. Now, he was shot in the face at a building in Manhattan owned by Anthony Robito and former Bonanno underboss Salvatore Vitali, and then allegedly driven to a garage in Queens, where he saw DeMeo holding a knife someone saw DeMeo holding a knife to dismember Borelli. Joseph Roschini, May the 20th of 1976. He was 43 years old, a Lucchese family soldier. Borschini was shot 5 times in the head inside of his office by DeMeo and Henry Borelli in Woodside. So funny that Roy DeMeo and Borelli are the ones who killed this man, right? But then they end up killing Borelli, okay? This is what they do. Now, Vincent Governor On June the 12th through the 19th of 1976, 34-year-old Governor was shot multiple times by DeMeo and Nino Gaggi as revenge for breaking Gaggi's nose in a fist fight in the late 1960s. Later died in the hospital. George Byram, in July 13th of 1976, killed by Roy DeMeo for tipping off thieves that led to Nino's Gaggi's vacation home in Florida being robbed. 42-year-old Byram was shot in the face and stabbed 11 times. Mickey Spillane, May 13, 1977, shot and killed by Danny Grillo and Roy DeMeo as a favor to James Coonan. Charles Ruby Stein, May 15, 1977, 61-year-old Genovese Colombo associate, killed by DeMeo Crew member Danny Grillo and James Coonan. Grillo shot Stein 6 times. His body was then dismembered by members of the Westy Gang. Jerome Hofaker, June of 1977, 23-year-old Hofaker was shot and killed by Anthony Center and Joseph Testa for getting into a fight with Joey's brother Dennis Testa. Joe Quinn and Sherry Golden, July the 20th of 1977, DeMeo Crew shot and killed 34-year-old John Quinn for testifying before a grand jury and his 19-year-old girlfriend Sherry Golden just because she was there. Now, Daniel Conti, October 29th, 1977. 28-year-old Conti was shot and killed by DeMeo and his brother-in-law, Peter Lafracio, after concerns that he would cooperate due to an investigation being opened in a failed hijacking attempt involving DeMeo Crew. John Costello, November of 1977, 20-year-old Costello was shot to death by Peter Lafracia and Roy DeMeo after concerns that he would cooperate with law enforcement in a illegal hijacking involving DeMeo Crew. And Michael Medellano and Nino Martini were killed on March 19th of 1978. Both were shot multiple times in the head by DeMeo Crew. 37-year-old Mandolino was accused of setting up Peter Lafracia for robbing a 38-year-old Martini, and in which he really had no involvement. Now, Patrick Prezzano was killed March the 23rd, 1978. 38-year-old Bonanno associate, son of Bonanno family Capo Angelo Provenzano, was beaten and shot, killed, then throat slit from ear to ear by Roy DeMeo after refusing to return stolen jewelry from an associate of Roy DeMeo's. Kevin Gooley, June the 9th, 1978. 28-year-old cocaine dealer shot and killed by DeMeo Crew Chris Rosenberg after he attempted to scam him out of $10,000. Michael DiCarlo, May 16th, 1978, Lucchese associate. His death was ordered by Lucchese Capo for raping a young boy. He was shot, stabbed, beaten, and sodomized by DeMeo. So he raped him for raping the kid. Pay attention. He was sodomized by DeMeo, Joseph Guglielmo, Danny Grillo, Henry Borelli, Anthony Center, and Joseph Testa. They all sodomized him, gang raped him for raping the boy. His body was then dismembered. Okay, Joseph Scorny, September the 28th, 1978. 28-year-old Scorny was shot and bludgeoned with a sledgehammer by Vito Areno and Richard Denome after refusing to join DeMeo's auto theft operation. His body was put in a concrete-filled barrel and dumped off of a pier. Whew. I'm talking about nefarious, and it's a long list. That's not even half of the list, people. Okay? These people are clearly devils. He just used that as an excuse to do what he wanted to do all along. Absolutely, Faith. Who does that, right? So you're going to make me so mad that I'm just going to rape you and I'm not even gay? Please miss me with it. That's crazy. So by 1982, the FBI was investigating the enormous number of missing and murdered persons who were linked to DeMeo or who had last been seen entering the Gemini Lounge. Now, it was around this time that an FBI bug in the home of Gambino family soldier Angelo Ruggiero picked up a conversation between Angelo and Gene Gotti, a brother of Capo John Gotti. Now, in the conversation, it is discussed that Paul Castellano had put out a hit on DeMeo, but was having difficulty finding someone willing to do the job because everyone was afraid of him. So Gene Gotti mentions that his brother John was wary of taking the contract, as DeMeo had an army of killers all around him at all times. And it was also mentioned that in this same secretly recorded conversation, that at the time, John had killed fewer than 10 people, while DeMeo had killed at least 38. Now, according to mob turncoat Salvatore Gravano, otherwise known as Sammy the Bull, eventually the contract was given to Frank DeSico, but Frank and his crew couldn't get to DeMeo either. DeSico allegedly handed the job to Roy's own men. They were having a hard time getting somebody to kill this man. He was notorious, no less. So Albert DeMeo wrote that in his final days, Roy was paranoid and knew that he would be killed soon. DeMeo considered faking his own death and leaving the country. However, instead, he left the house one day and never returned. Albert DeMeo later found Roy's personal belongings, such as his wallet, his watch, and a ring in his study room, and also a religious pamphlet indicating that Roy had gone to confession before his death. Now, according to the book Murder Machine, in his final days, Roy DeMeo was seen wearing a leather jacket with a shotgun concealed underneath. On January the 10th of 1983, DeMeo went to crew members Patrick Tesla's body shop for a meeting with his men. A few days later, on January the 18th, he was found murdered in his abandoned car trunk. He had been shot multiple times in the head and had a bullet wound in his hand, assumed by law enforcement as being from throwing his hand up in front of his face as self-defense, trying to reflect the bullets before they were fired, or as they were fired at him. Now, Anthony Gaggi was suspected by law enforcement of being the one who personally killed DeMeo. Although it is likely DeMeo Crew members Joseph Testa and Anthony Center were present as well. Gaggi was not charged with the crime, although he was charged with a number of other murders. He died of a heart attack during his trial in 1988 at the age of 62. According to Anthony Cassio's 2008 biography, Roy DeMeo was killed at Patrick Testa's East Flatbush home by Joseph Testa and Anthony Center, following an agreement with Casso, who was given the contract by Gotti and DeSico after they were unable to kill DeMeo during the fall of 1982. Now, the Casso's biography notes that DeMeo was seated, about to receive coffee, when Testa and Center opened fire. Anthony Gaggi was not present. In April of 1984, Colombo crime family soldier Ralph Scopo was overheard explaining to an associate that DeMeo had been killed by his own family because they merely suspected that he would not be able to stand up to legal charges that resulted from his stolen car ring. The motive, as suggested by Scopo, is widely accepted by law enforcement and other sources. Another reason was that DeMeo was attracting too much attention from the FBI. Now, DeMeo's crew was soon rounded up, and the core members, which were Henry Borelli, Joseph Testa, and Anthony Center, were all in prison for life after 2 trials that saw them convicted of a collective of 25 murders, in addition to extortion, car theft, and drug trafficking. Now, the convictions were secured in large part by testimony from former members. So they ratted each other out, basically. The members that snitched were Frederick Denome and Dominic Matiglio. Paul Castellano was indicted for ordering the murder of DeMeo as well as a host of other crimes, but was killed in December of 1985 while he was out on bail in the middle of his first trial. The murder was ordered by John Gotti, who thus became the new boss of the Gambino crime family. This is all so juicy. I can't wait until the Most High wipe these. Okay. Let me tell you something, people. This is notorious, right? So now listen to this. Hold on. Listen to this. This is another article, and I want to give you some of this information as well. Now, in the days leading up to January the 10th of 1983, Roy DeMeo, the former butcher's apprentice and creator of the Gemini Method to dispose of murder victims for the Gambino crime family, felt trapped between a task of law enforcement officers pursuing him, and as well his own crew, who feared that he would turn on them and would try to avoid a long prison sentence. Now, DeMeo, dressed in a long overcoat with a pocket concealing a sawed-off shotgun. He drove the streets of Brooklyn in a new 1983 Cadillac, registered in his wife's name. In the trunk was a chandelier from his Long Island home that he once intended to have repaired. But that was far from his mind now. A few weeks prior, a federal grand jury had subpoenaed DeMeo for the second time to testify in a racketeering case. Now, he told his son Albert, whose 17th birthday was January the 10th, that his father was marked for death. A police investigation into the Gambino's profitable international car theft ring led to joint local and federal probes into a string of mob homicides. A member of DeMeo's car theft and hit crew, Vito Arena, had flipped and told the federal prosecutors about several murders that he participated in for DeMeo. DeMeo himself, or with his crew, participated in more than 200 homicides, almost without detection, starting in the 1970s. Now, in June of 1982, Arena showed police where to find the bodies of one of the crew's victims, a low-level hoodlum encased in a cement-filled oil barrel, submerged in Moriches Bay off of Long Island. Now, growing increasingly fearful, DeMeo likely heard rumors that Gambino boss, Paul Costello, wanted to silence him. He discovered too late that the loyalty of his oldest and closest friends lay with the boss instead of him. Lured to a garage in Brooklyn used for the car theft ring, the 42-year-old DeMeo met with his trusted comrade and mentor, Anthony Nino Gaggi, a Gambino Kappa, 15 years his senior. Now, he'd known Nino since 1965. But Nino had to obey Castellano's hit command. No sooner had DeMeo removed his jacket than Nino opened fire. DeMeo tried to deflect the shots with his hands, but 2 slugs burst into his face. Other shooters, his colleagues in murder, probably helped inflict a total of 7 head wounds. Shot in the head 7 times, can you imagine? Now, they carried his body and laid it in the trunk of the Cadillac, draping the chandelier over his corpse. They drove the car and left it in a lot of the Bayside Boat Club in Brooklyn. With low winter temperatures, his body soon froze. Despite complaints, the auto remained parked there for 10 days until the police towed it. Now, hours later, they opened the trunk, and DeMeo's family would later they opened the trunk and found DeMeo. Now, DeMeo's family would later receive more than $1 million in property that DeMeo had put in their names. Killings performed by DeMeo and his troupe of 6 sadists would rival that of Brooklyn's Murder Incorporated of the 1930s. If Boss Castellano demanded a contract hit or a message-sending murder with the body dumped in public to serve as a warning, DeMeo and his goons were happy to oblige. Now, DeMeo was a loan shark, and with his crew made a fortune selling luxury cars from New York streets. 4 to 7 vehicles a night were stolen. Now, the stolen cars were sold overseas, and the team also pushed illegal drugs. He regularly kicked bundles of cash from the car ring up to Castellano. DeMeo killed his first man in 1973. Now, in one case, DeMeo reportedly inserted a man's severed head into a trash compactor. Arena later testified in federal court about when DeMeo and another shooter killed 2 unsuspecting car ring members inside of a dark building in 1979. He says, Roy said, "We have to cut them up." Then during his dismemberment session of the victims, Roy instructed me and Henry Borelli he told us, believe this or not, but he told us to go buy some pizza. So now he's cutting somebody's body up, dismembering them after they're dead, and he tells them to go buy pizza because he's hungry. Who can eat at a time like that? So DeMeo's credo was no body, no crime. But his glaring personality flaws, his rashness, and his dread, as the police and the U.S. Attorney's Office closed in, finally enveloped him. So with that all being said, that's the story of Roy DeMeo and his crew. Now, DeMeo's death occurred at the start of the Great Fall of New York's 5 crime families during the 1980s. As of 1984, the FBI estimated that half of the 1,600 members of La Cosa Nostra in America resided in the New York area. That year, Costello and Nino were among 21 defendants, including some survivors of DeMeo Crew, to face federal allegations in the car theft ring. Also, 25 related murders, drug trafficking, loan sharking, extortion, fraud, and prostitution, although most of these charges wouldn't stick. Now, some cooperated with the Office of Southern District U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani. He was probably going to use that person he chopped up as pepperoni on his pizza. Thank you for your input and your contribution, Silent D. Peace, love, and blessings to you. And happy birthday again. Now, Costello was on break in his federal hold on. Okay, let me read that over because I skipped something. DeMeo's death occurred at the start of the Great Fall of New York's 5 crime families during the 1980s. As of 1984, the FBI estimated that half of the 1,600 members of La Cosa Nostra in America resided in the New York area. Now, that year, Costello and Nino were among 21 defendants, including some of the survivors of DeMeo Crew, that faced federal allegations in the car theft ring, 25 related murders, drug trafficking, loan sharking, extortion, fraud, and prostitution, although some of the charges would not stick. Now, some cooperated with the Office of Southern District U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani. A couple of others, such as Dracula, disappeared, almost certainly killed without a trace by DeMeo's remaining cronies. Now, Costello, on a break in his federal racketeering trial in December of 1985, died on a New York street from gunfire delivered by allies of future Gambino boss John Gotti. In 1988, Nino died from a heart attack, from heart trouble in jail while on trial for racketeering. Arena released from prison in 1988 based on his damning testimony, moved to Texas. And in 1991, while an armed Arena tried to rob a store in Houston, a clerk shot and killed him. So he clearly, this is the thing, these people cannot stop their lives of crime. When they've been having all this money and used to making all this thousands and thousands a week, he resorted to crime again. Now, he'd been given a break. He got off for the racketeering and all the other stuff, only to go to Texas. And this was in 1980. I believe this was in 1988 when he got over the charges, but goes to Texas, tries to rob a store, and was killed in 1998, just a few short years later. Now, in June of 1989, 7 members of DeMeo's crew were convicted of racketeering. 2 of his former buddies in murder, Anthony Center and Joseph Testa, were among 5 also found guilty of participating in 11 slayings. Center, DeMeo's right-hand man, who once chopped a body into 9 pieces for disposal, and Testa each got life sentences plus 20 years in federal prison. Now, the Roy DeMeo crew is the most violent crew ever prosecuted in a federal court. As far as knowledge is known, Assistant U.S. Attorney William Mack Jr. said that after sentencing, adding that DeMeo engaged in wholesale murder. And let me tell you something. This crew they are of the top 5 biggest gangsters and killers of Mafia crews. They rank number 3. And they are said to have been one of the most notorious crime crews in history. Okay? So, oh, you're welcome, Silent D. So there you have it, people. Clearly nefarious, no less, right? Millie says, wow, yes, isn't that something? They were doing all this killing. And not to think that before they started killing up these people, they were practicing butchering blacks and Puerto Ricans. Okay? How crazy is that? So clearly nefarious. But let me tell you all something, because this is what I thought about when I was researching this. Let me tell you all something. You notice how the Mafia, I want you to pay attention, people. You notice how the Mafia, Trina, you said who was number one? Probably Scarface Al Capone and his crew. Now, listen, you know how they brought down the crime families, brought down the Mafia, right? Now, I want you to ask yourself, who is the most notorious for killing and has committed the most killings and crimes and all of that? Was it the Mafia or was it street gangs? Clearly, it was the Mafia, right? The Mafia was much more notorious than any street gang you can mention. With that all being said, the Mafia, in fact, was a gang. They were just called the Mafia, not called a gang. That being said, do you see how the FBI and the police collectively in the Divided Snakes brought down the Mafia? You see that, right? You see how they brought down the Mafia. Now, you need to ask yourselves, all of you, why the hell they can't bring down gangs? Why they can't bring down street gangs? I'm glad you asked. I'm going to tell you why. You see, the Mafia was in the business of killing white people. You see, the Mafia killed their own people. They snitched on their own people. They sold drugs to their own people. If one person crossed them, it was nothing for them to kill a person who looked just like them. In fact, they acted just like street gangs do, only worse. You see, street gangs, they kill their rivals, right? For competition, for disrespecting them, for whatever reason. Mafia does the same thing, right? With that all being said, you think the Divided Snakes government wants white people killing other white people? No, they don't. You think they want them putting other white people on drugs? No, they don't. You think they want them extorting money from white-owned businesses? No, they don't. So what did they do? They brought them down. But meanwhile, gangs are allowed to flourish and stay in your communities. You see how that works? Now, although every now and then they may lock up a gang member or two, but collectively to bring down gangs is not ever going to be in their agenda. Okay? That's what it's not going to be, because they want gangs to flourish. They want gangs to stay in the black community because, hey, gang members kill other people who look just like them. The people they have the most angst and disdain for are people who look just like them. The people they peddle their drugs to are people who look just like them. The people who they extort money from their businesses from are people who look just like them. So as far as they're concerned, what's good for the goose is not always good for the gander. Okay? Please pay attention. All right? With that all being said, I'm going to conclude this broadcast. I would like to thank you all for tuning in once again. Now, I was going to do another live tonight, but I'm not. I'm tired. I have been working all day. It took me hours to get this crazy computer fixed, people. So I apologize, but I won't be doing another live tonight. But nevertheless, I will be doing multiple lives tomorrow. And tomorrow, I will be going live for the first time on my channel, Queen Ahmadiyyah TV Presents, More Than Meets the Third Eye, okay? The conscious and spiritual channel. I'll be going live on there, and I will also be doing another episode on Queen Ahmadiyyah TV Presents The Root of All Evil. So I will be doing another video on there, okay? So if you haven't subscribed to those channels, please make sure that you do. Thank you, Woke One. Woke One says, enjoy your rest, Queen. Thank you. So please make sure, much appreciation, beloved Queen, get your beauty rest. Be safe, be one family. Thank you, Jesus Black the Christ. So with that all being said, I hope you all enjoy the rest of this evening. Be sure to like and share the video. Make sure that you subscribe to the channels if you haven't done so already. With that being said, I hope to see you all black in the chat tomorrow. Now listen, tomorrow I'm going to start doing videos early because I have some other stories that I want to put out too, news stories and trending stories or whatever. So I'm probably going to start doing my lives maybe around 1 o'clock. Okay. So if you don't get a notification, just make sure you check the channel. All right. With that being said, I wish you all love, peace, and prosperity. And until next time, Royals, I will talk to you all again soon.